Hi, everybody. Hopefully everybody is back. I'm Madam Onça, and for anybody who's just joining us now, and I am the creator of the World Spirit Tarot, right here, which hopefully will be having a new edition coming out for its 20th year in 2021. I'm working on that artwork now. As it is, we are exploring both the symbolism of this deck and tarot decks in general when it comes to animals. So if you're just joining us now, I invite you to sort your cards out by suit so that we can move through them with some ease. So put all your wands together and your cups together, your pentacles together, your swords together, and your major arcana together. You can do that while I make with the chat. We are going to wander through the cards and discuss some of the traditional symbolism of all the various animals that appear in the cards. I invite you to chime in with your own associations as well through the chat, and I love to come around to those sort of questions and points. This is our special topic class for today. I'm pretty jazzed about it. The first thing that I would like to say about this notion of animal symbolism in the tarot. First, there's a falsehood implicit immediately in that statement, because I never personally lose sight of the notion that humans are animals. The idea that we exist as something separate, the idea that we are somehow separate from animals is preposterous to me. Clearly, we are in the family of animals. But when we say animal symbolism in the tarot, I am attempting to narrow the focus from hominids to everybody else today, and that will be our focus. So again, you want to sort your cards out into various piles by suit so that they'll be easy to access. On the subject of symbolism and animals, let us also make a note that all interpretations symbolically in tarot are equally relevant. There's classic associations that are accrued to animals. I have my own personal, you will have your own personal. There are added cultural layers that may be important depending on who you're reading for. Strive to be as open-minded as possible about what animal symbolism means. With that in mind, I'd like to sound a cautionary note. If you are referring to any work, any sort of dream interpretation or animal symbolism interpretation books and so forth that present culture as monolithic, like Native American people feel this, or African religions say, like, anything that speaks monolithically of anybody, you should immediately throw that book over your shoulder, because that's not how our experiences are actually organized as hominids. So that being said, you can certainly do your best with the resources available. Basically, it's all out there for you. Just be savvy about your sources. Be sensitive, be better about your sources than some of our Victorian antecedents were. The classic tarot cards did a lot of their developing, symbolically speaking, in times of low literacy. Of course, that is part of how it was. That is why they are so symbol rich. But many people in the history of the tarot would have been well acquainted with symbolism through heraldry, through the church iconography, even folk tales. The Rider-Waite-Smith deck itself, which we refer to often in this class, that one right there, was massively informed by Catholic mysticism, which many of the witchy folks who love that as like the one true tarot deck would probably be surprised to realize how incredibly Christian that deck actually is, which is fine. The Rider-Waite is also very full of sort of Victorian era, occult and metaphysical conventions. And the artist who drew it was immersed in, the theater lifestyle, particularly Shakespeare. So a lot of what's in the Rider-Waite deck is just literally imagery that she borrowed directly from costumes and sets that she painted with her friends that were part of her artistic shorthand, which makes them no less valid by any means, but it shows how much we are learning to experience these sort of these living traditions of the tarot are shaped by the experience of the makers and the users. So once again, you get to make choices about how you would like to shape that culture. Because these symbols come to us through all of these various filters, they they can be employed as a springboard for your own interpretation, but they certainly should not define the scope of it unless you are committed to only experience the tarot through the lens of a theater-loving, absinthe-drinking, fringe fringe occultist on the edge of becoming a Catholic. Like, that's a very specific prism. And you can do that, but you can also do all that and more. The animals and the symbols in the tarot, of course, offer metaphors for specific insights and a visual language for our inner awareness. That sort of word soup basically means that the purpose of having animals other than humans depicted in tarot cards, it may be just because, you like Snuffles the cat, who we saw in the previous class. But in fact, it's generally because animals serve as a sort of focal point for traits, dream imagery. They prompt sort of an intuitive response in us, and they become a focal point for all of that good stuff. And it allows an artistic opportunity for those elements to be introduced into the meaning of the card. Also, from the point of view of artists, drawing animals is so cool. And carving them and painting them, and what a pleasure it is to be able to work with some of the diversity that we share the planet with. So, some might argue that, the specific animals have like archetypal power, i.e. that the image and the associations that come with each animal are sort of hardwired into the human psyche. That is, you hear the word archetype thrown around a lot. I would encourage you to consider that, because if that were true, everyone would experience animal symbolism the same way. And we mostly don't. It's very culturally specific. So I would say that saying, the snake always means the same thing, or the lion always means the same thing, is a very Eurocentric way to look at it. And again, I encourage you to explore other resources in terms of informing your dream and animal metaphor language. So again, your personal associations matter enormously, as well as those of the querent, whoever you might be reading for. Some of the resources you might consider, dream symbolism dictionaries. Ted Andrews, I think his name was, had what esteemed metaphysicians and occultists, refer to as sort of the definitive guide, like shamanic guide to animal symbolism. He's a white guy who made a living, in the shaman business. So you have to take that with a grain of salt, but people that I esteem consider his work worthy. So, that sort of shamanic language guide might be a resource. Again, your own dream journals, if you go that way, medieval and heraldic symbolism, all that good stuff. Your own likes and aversions are totally relevant. If you look at an animal in a card, do you like that animal? Does it inspire you? Does it speak to you? Does it intimidate you? All totally relevant. Again, today we're going to mostly walk through the symbolism of the animals that is in my own deck, and also the Rider-Waite deck. I have my own deck here with me, and I have this book ready to hand. I didn't lay out the other 78 cards, so if you have questions about specific symbolism, feel free to chime in the chat. It's also worth mentioning that there are astrological associations for lots of the animals in the cards, and I'm only hip to some of those. I mean, some of the very obvious ones like bulls and Taurus and crustaceans and Scorpios. There's tons more to that, and there are folks in our community who are much better able to speak to the astrological aspect, as that is something I'm still learning. Those correspondences were added late in the lifespan of the tarot, meaning in the last 150 years. So I'm still getting caught up on that. There are, of course, many other tarot decks that have lots of other animals. For example, the Wild Unknown is basically all animals with very specific symbolism attached to them. The Light and Shadow Tarot is a wonderful deck. I can't say enough good things about if you like, animals. It's really, it's another block print deck made by Brian Williams and Michael Gepford, I believe. So The Light and Shadow, if you want to Google that up, it's got beautiful animal imagery in it. And of course, there's the Cat People Tarot and the Gummy Bear Tarot. Like, there's no end of the animals that you could explore if you were interested in it. Let us grab the major cards, and we're going to start. Basically, I thought we would just walk through the deck card by card and see which ones pop up. Some of mine will have slightly different imagery than the other ones, than some of the traditional ones. again, feel free to chime in the chat with any notes that you'd like to add about it. The Fool card, traditionally, most versions of the Fool have some kind of a dog. We see the figure leaping off the ledge or the roof or the cliff or whatever, and there's usually a dog and some birds. There are also some very interesting versions of the Fool card where it's a crocodile sort of pulling at the hem of their garment. But most typically it is the dog. And my understanding of what that dog speaks to, dogs in the tarot in general speak to the notion of our intuitive selves, our animal instincts, domesticated to a certain extent, meaning it is wildness contained and made manageable. In this case, this dog, this companion is also acting as a bit of a guardian and a bit of a guide and a bit of conscience for that person. And one of the questions in the interpretation of the Fool card when it comes up for you is, is that dog saying, don't jump, it's a bad time, or take me too, I'm going to grab your hem. Along with that notion of this this sort of canine companion with their interesting mix of intuition, instinct, sort of animal skills, and that domesticated notion. We also see typically there's some kind of birds. The birds are there partly to suggest height and loftiness, of course, that this person is up on a cliff or a rooftop. But birds often in the tarot speak to, they're like divine messengers. There's this notion that they're sort of a bridge, between the as above and so below, that they are carrying information between the sort of magical hemispheres, that they are a psychopomp, which is like a guide for the soul. So all of these things come together around our Fool to suggest that, as this card often does, that while it may look like a risky endeavor, you actually have sort of companionship and guardianship as you make the leap. So we see this theme come up with dogs and birds over and over. Again, sometimes this will also have like crocodiles, or somebody will put just their very own special critters in there. I also made a long list that I'm going to refer to right now, just to see if there's any other qualities that I missed in there. So many. Dogs love unconditionally and are capable of intense loyalty. It's not in their nature to be nasty or vicious, but they can lose their compassionate nature through sort of a perverse loyalty to their people. I thought that was an interesting note. Yeah. So we see, that's what we see there in the Fool. We see that character making a leap, and we see that dog suggesting that they are not alone in making their leap. Okay, let's go to, sorry, I'm scrolling through my notes. Let's look at the High Priestess. Days may jump around a bit in order. Like I said, I think I could have spent 10 more hours preparing this material. Now the Priestess, if I remember correctly, and the Rider-Waite does not have any kind of companionship unless the pomegranate counts as an animal. In my version, there is an owl in the corner. Of course, the owl in the West, symbolically, we think of it having to do with the goddess of wisdom. And of course, we see there's that little owl. To me, it pops up in the corner, not only to speak to wisdom and sagacity, but also in this case, the Priestess is so clearly in her element, literally al fresco, out in nature. She's sort of in the raw, in the moonlight. And the owl speaks to being fully aware and fully immersed in your environment in the dark, even though the Priestess has her eyes closed. That owl is sort of acting on her behalf to be fully aware and fully immersed in all of the information in her environment. So it's almost like a magical amplification of senses, is how I would interpret the presence of the owl in most of the time in these readings. Let's look at, again, feel free to chime in if you have any questions over here. Let us jump next to the Empress and the Emperor. There's my Emperor and the Empress. Okay, so in my Empress card, there's lots and lots of birds. Primarily, it's really just about her and a snake. Birds, once again, messengers of the as above and so below. There's a sense with a number of birds flocking together. There's a feeling of sort of community, togetherness, and single-mindedness, even as she is off having a moment to herself under the princess tree. And the presence of snakes, of course, they are one of the oldest symbols that humans have been known to carve into rocks and stones and bone. A perfect moment, a perfect test case of that notion of snakes are not perhaps archetypal, because some entire cultures are terrified of them, whereas some absolutely venerate the snake as a symbol of the cyclic nature of life, symbols of transformation, death and rebirth, symbol of, yes, absolutely, totally, I was thinking about that. Speaking of this notion of, a snake in your house is a great thing, not only on a sort of metaphysical level, but the snake in your house is also, keeping the mice out of the grain. Like, we have these sort of post Christian cultural associations with snakes as being liars and tricksters and so forth, but that's not universal. So when we see a snake appear in a setting like this, like, clearly it is speaking to that notion of being at ease and at one with your environment. And we see amongst all these sort of flocking birds, here we have just this one that is swooping in a little closer to be close to the glory that is the Empress, who is just pure, she's a being of pure sensation and pleasure, as it were, and comfort. So those critters are almost an extension of her own animalistic nature. We're going to go from there to the Emperor. Now, I actually don't have any sort of animals in my Emperor card, but in a Rider-Waite deck, if anybody happens to have one of those, I'll see if I can find a picture of it. Here's mine. He's just sort of speaking, to the citizens, like he is the city. Let's see if I can find a picture of the Emperor. The traditional rendering of the Emperor that comes to us from the Rider-Waite deck, while he is a very sort of stony cold and metal man alone in his environment, if you look close, you can see that there are sort of ram's heads built in all over the place. So this brings us to this interesting point that the animal symbolism in the tarot isn't always, living animals that are sort of embodied in the scene with the character. Sometimes they are, built into the garments and so forth. And you see that a lot in the Rider-Waite deck. Like, there will be an actual salamander in one card, but in the Wands cards, they're all just, their clothes are all heavily patterned with salamanders, as if to sort of riff on this idea of it being the element of fire and so forth. So in his case, when we see these ram's heads typically come up, rams are, of course, there's likely an association with Aries and sort of drive and all that, which would be appropriate for the Emperor since he's such a driven character. But it's also very much, rams get lumped in the sort of Western sensibility with goats and all of that, a sort of ungulate family, as far as being driven, lusty, close to the earth, and so forth. So in the context of the Emperor, everything about that is trying to reinforce the notion that he has harnessed his sort of animal nature towards his hominid goals, building civilization, if you want to think of it that way. So he's often associated with the ram. Now let's jump to the chariot. Most versions of the chariot have some kind of crazy animals. Maybe they're sphinxes, maybe like lion head, woman breast, sort of carved, almost statue-like body. In my deck, it's similar, but they're like sort of mythical seahorses, but the zebra version. The sphinxes in the tarot, to the interpretations that I have come to understand, they speak, of course, to the unknown, to the unknowable, where the sphinx is famous for their riddle, right? And the notion of all of these sort of animals that are built out of, maybe they're a human hybrid, maybe it's a zebra fish, maybe it is a part cat, or like the old unicorns were like part camel, part goat, part leopard. These fusion animals speak to the notion of a blending of a lot of characteristics and How can I put that? So they represent this notion of like everything about the animal nature, gut instinct, animal comfort, all of that combined to, I want to call it like a marriage or a blend of intellect and intuitive functions. I know for myself in my own art, through my entire life, I've been drawing the horned god in some capacity since I was a little kid. And I never thought of it in terms of any kind of like Baphomet imagery or anything as a kid. It was just this notion of like a humanoid person, but with their instincts intact. And so that was represented by the cat feet, or by the horse tail, or, in this notion where you've got something that suggests a blend of multiple elements all trying to find their balance and come to bear. So all satyrs and all of these kind of critters all have a lot to say about fusion. And of course, again, this is a place where you can look at it and go, oh, I love zebras. Oh, I hate fish. And your associations are going to totally inform how you feel about this chariot card, Okay, let's jump from there to the lion and then the wheel of fortune. I honestly don't know if we'll get through like the whole deck. There's a lot to cover. I should mention in passing that the Hierophant, while traditionally there's not a living animal present in the Hierophant, he is, in this case, he's wearing sort of the jaguar, which was one of the marks of the priest. And again, sort of allows the human person to embody, the sort of fierce, noble virtues of the jaguar. So again, it's all about the fabric. It's all about the clothes. Okay, where were we? We were gonna look at the strength card and the wheel of fortune. Yay! Strength card. Since time uncertain, there's been a lion in there. As we know, in the strength card, it used to be a man tearing the head off a lion. Gradually, it turned into a woman who appeared to be sort of just looking into a lion's mouth, playing home dentist. And in this card has associations with Leo, and in my version of it has come to also be inhabited by this mouse and this snake. Now, the lion, typically in tarot symbolism, again, this is very much coming out of that Western tradition. So if you have a different experience, that's totally relevant. If you have a, good story or a bad story about lions, it's totally relevant. Usually it is about physical power that has been harnessed to some sort of cause. Like the lion obviously could eat her, and he is not opting to do that. He is not opting to do a strength flex in that way. So it's about physical power harnessed to a purpose. At its worst, it can be power over others. It can be lazy, prideful, sexist, because of course male lions don't do much. But at its best, it is a symbol of sort of nobility and the whole notion of the king of the forest. This idea of at its best, nobility embodied, I guess you might say. So there's our lion. Okay, but what about the mouse? Mice can speak to humble, great things from humble status. They can speak to being nimble, and so forth. Of course, because we all know the story of the little mouse getting the thorn out of the lion's paw. I very much had that in my mind here. So again, there's this notion that this card is about strength, and yet the little mouse with its little nimble fingers and its little problem solving is right here at the core of this notion of strength. It's not power over and domination so much as it is about the right push at the right time. So I find that mice come up in my work often also to speak sort of to your conscience, like to the part of you that knows better. So, and here, then we also see this once again, the snake makes an appearance back there as well, bringing all of its associations of immortality, resurrection. Are we doing this again? It's the cyclic nature of things. So there's a lot of animal symbolism. There happens to be a lady in the middle of this card as well, but so much of this card is really caught up in that relationship between, these creatures of sort of fire and earth. So, and then the Wheel of Fortune. All versions of the Wheel of Fortune tend to be very different. It is the only card that is, it may have Donna Fortuna, like that divinity of, it may have that element of sort of like a divine person, Donna Fortuna, like Lady Luck, but it is also the only thing that is actually a device. So that's interesting. In here we also see there's like a Patronus in the background, and of course there's a satyr right up here in the front. So I think that these are here sort of to represent, you know, the agrarian lifestyle and the hunter-gatherer lifestyle, sort of the stages of the human experience. And Karen also says in the chariot there are animals in the background as well. Do you have a Rider-Waite one there? Oh yes, absolutely. Yeah, and here we've got, in this one we've got you know, there's a female lion back there lurking. There's that element of like, it's time to go, do not procrastinate. Because while you are trying to decide what to do, the world is watching. I interpret that as not exactly as an element of menace, but as an element of like, here in the natural world, there are consequences. Perhaps you should get on with the business of charioting. Okay, where were we? So, oops, sorry, I'm referring to my notes. Also, in the star card, traditionally in the Rider-Waite, there is an ibis, which is a great. That's the bird with the hooked nose. You know, the ibis is traditionally. It is a symbol of the god Mercury and Thoth. These are psychopomps. Again, they are birds that guide the soul from one sort of plane of existence to another, and they are the birds that sort of speak for and with the gods, Mercury and, you know, all the talkie gods, Gemini gods. I did not have an ibis in the original version of my star card, although the one that I'm making now for the 2021 edition, I do. Here I just have a bird, and it is up there trying to psychopomp as best it can in this watery landscape. So the star typically has got, in addition to lots of water and lots of asterism, lots of star energy, there's usually some sort of a bird in there suggesting that there's also a little bit of divine magic in that card. Okay. Also, I should mention the people cards have tons of animals, and honestly, we could spend a lot of time just talking about those. A traditional deck of the people cards are usually going to be, the knights all have horses. Again, the light and shadow tarot that I mentioned earlier, they're riding eagles and bison, and the animals are just exuberantly awesome. In my deck, because I like animals and I like animal symbolism, all of the people cards have got some kind of animals, and we could, like I said, we could spend time with just that. Okay, but let's continue to move through here. There is, of course, you don't need that guy. There's, of course, the devil. Let's get our devil card out. Oh, the devil made me do it. And then we'll get the death card. Cue that one up, which is here somewhere too. There we go. So the devil and death. We'll get the big D's out. The devil card, traditionally we see sort of a, it's not a very flattering version of Baphomet. There's sort of a blobby, horned god kind of a guy standing there looking very ominous, and the people with him are very clearly shackled. It's intended to not look like the best time. I wanted mine to look a little bit more seductive, as addiction so often is. But I still wanted to communicate that notion of the sort of earthy, lusty, primal animal. So there's this very burly sort of Black Phillip character over here. So getting that, because of course goats for a long time in the West have had this association with the devil. And I have to say, I don't know if you've ever been around like a fully male goat. And I don't mean just like, oh, look, it's a cute little goat at the petting zoo, but like a fully male goat looks like that. They're like pure testosterone or something, and they reek. They are strangely like powerful, sexy animals that have this unbelievable smell, and they're so douchey. It's a complex series of emotions that comes out of an animal like that. You can really see why they got so much baggage attached to them. And over here, once again, we see this serpent, this walking serpent. It's actually an Egyptian funerary snake daemon. It is Neheb-Cow is the name of this particular snake demon. So he is a snake with all of the snake stuff, but he also has a whole other layer of cultural associations with him. He just kind of snuck in there, Egyptian snake god. So there is the devil, again, speaking to that all that whole goatiness. Now, if we come to the death card, most death cards traditionally, I think the only animal that's usually in them is the horse that death is riding. And strangely, if I'm not mistaken, it's usually a black horse, which is funny because, of course, in some of the stories, death came on a pale horse. But anyway, there is no horse in mine. The animal in question here, it's not about what death rode in on. It's about what the soul is flying out on, which is the phoenix. And the phoenix, of course, speaks to the transmutation of matter or energy from one state to another. So anytime the phoenix energy comes up in a tarot reading, it's very much about, it's not just about the difficult transition that you're in. It is about where you are going and what you will be once you have made that transmutation. So never underestimate the power of the phoenix image. And if you are drawn to that, there's so much that you can research about it. Now let's go to the sun. We already talked about the star or this ibis business. So we'll go to the sun and then to the moon. Where's my moon card? No idea. Oh, there it is. Right where I left it. Okay, so the sun card, the Rider-Waite deck, that's typically Pudgy Baby, Jolly White Pony series of sunflowers. The early edition of my deck was very different on the sun card, and this is much more a return to the traditional, but rather than a horse, this is a unicorn. My notes about horses and what they tend to represent in the tarot: horses generally represent movement, right? All of the knights, the seekers usually have them. Humans have had a very powerful attachment to horses as soon as we were able to get near them. Once we got past eating them to riding them, think about the white horse of Uffington, that gigantic chalk figure that's carved into the hillside, in the UK. They transformed the very nature of the human experience. So horses are about mobility and nobility. They are about liberty. Again, it's the teenager with a car. It's like everything that is symbolized by having free agency. They are all of those things, and unicorns are all of that except with more sparkle. And of course, there's a wide world of symbolism around a sort of purity and sexuality and everything. You can go right down the unicorn hole, as it were. But they're everything that a horse is, with more explicit sparkle and hints of sexuality. So yeah, unicorns. Oh, and look, birds, always more birds. When in doubt, add birds. Now the moon card, the symbolism that we see in the moon, this is one of the places where you most get to editorialize. Most often we see some sort of pillars, watchtowers, something in the background. There's water or a river or a pool boiling up in the foreground. And then we see two canids. They tend to be a little ambiguous, either because they're poorly lit, since they're in the moonlight, but it is generally interpreted as a dog on one side and a wolf on the other. Now, these two canids speak, on the one hand, maybe you love wolves and you hate dogs. Maybe you hate dogs and you love wolves. Your element of personality comes into interpreting them. They are often understood, however, to mean if the dog speaks to, or if the canid speaks to something about the wildness, then the wolf is the untamed. It is the proud, wild, untamed aspect of your psyche. And the canid, the dog, speaks to that, again, which is somewhat domesticated. It's like the part that can talk to you. This is, the loyalty, this is the devotion, this is all of that animal intelligence, but radiating towards you, whereas the wolf, its loyalty is not to you, its loyalty is to nature. So in the card, you may experience them both very much coming up at you. And I always think of that as just an acknowledgement that the messages that the moon brings us, or the dangers that the moon presents, some of them will be accessible and easy to understand, and some of them will be more rarefied, more occult. Now, typically also in that water, we see something coming up. Maybe it's a fish, maybe it's a crab, sometimes it's a lobster, maybe it's a scorpion sort of thing. In mine, it definitely looks a little bit like a lobster. And that crustaceans, I saw somebody refer to them as shellfish, but I would say crustaceans because lots of things are shellfish. Crustaceans, mobile entities that come up out of the water, very much are, again, it's about messages coming from not just your deep mind, but from your old mind. If you would indulge me in imagining that your physical and spiritual heritage of brain matter. We've got all of this stuff up in the front here, this gray matter and so forth, that we think of as the very human, the very modern, contemporary, meaning in the last, I don't know, 200,000 years, whatever, this very modern part of our brain. But if you go down closer to the brainstem, there's sort of the more primal brain, what we used to refer to as the reptilian brain. And that's where we keep a lot of our basic, like fight, flight, can I conquer it? Can I eat it? Can I fuck it? That part of our brain still gives us a lot of the information that helps us to live and survive today. And it is encouraged by society to kind of overrule a lot of that, so we think that we're entirely run by, this thin veneer of science. But a lot of times we're still really running on these other deeper programs. So I think of that, the messages that are coming through in the moon, that crustacean is carrying not just old information, but like information from the part of you where your instincts told you don't go into this cave, there's something bad in there. Or I don't know about science and math, but I sense that the days are about to start get longer and warmer. So it's that very much that sort of primal intelligence that did great job keeping us alive for, millions of years. So so the moon really brings all of those things together. Let us see. We've got, let's take a second to look at judgment and the world. I think those were the other ones that I have here that have specifically got some animal business in them. Nothing there. In the judgment card, there are no animals that appear in the Rider-Waite deck unless you count hominids. That is the creepy image of the sort of necrotic people rising out of the sarcophagi towards the sort of phallic angel. My version of that is, you're still dealing with sort of an afterlife processing, as it were. We see here both, once again, the dromedary, that hardy creature that suggests nobility, long memory, self-sufficiency, and transport. Seems very appropriate when the judgment, if you're looking at moving from one phase of your life into another. And in this case, we see Anubis themselves, that human canid fusion that, iconographically speaking, a lot of times is again about a blending of characteristics. So it's everything that is the human, everything that is the wisdom of that particular animal fused together. Now, and then we're going to look at the world card, which my world card is very much like the Rider-Waite. We see in the corner, well, in the middle, we see our fabulous world doing her dance. And in the corners, we see, typically there are 4 critters. Now, in the Rider-Waite deck, I know that it is the 4 animal icons that represent the 4 evangelists. And I must admit, they elude me right now. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, I don't know. There's usually a lion, a bull, an angel, and something else. Perhaps if you have that deck in front of you, you can point it out right now. Maybe it's the eagle. So maybe it's the eagle and the angel. So there's 4. And I wanted there to be 4 as well, but I just made an adaptation to allow for the notion that they were speaking for the 4 elements as well as anything else. So that notion of, the creature of the earth, the creature of the air, the creature of the water, the creature of the fire, which gives us, of course, we've got the bull, we've got the raven comes back to us with their messages from the divine. Once again, we've got that sort of prideful lion and the dolphin who showed up earlier in one of the Queen's cards. The dolphins are, to me, always speak of sort of a special intelligence. Man is Matthew, the lion Mark, the ox Luke, and the eagle John. Yes, you just did your saints. You're up on that. Again, I was conscious of that when I was making my own, but I wasn't sure how well they could be understood to represent the elements. And for me, the tarot is so much about that. So that brings us through the major cards. Oh my goodness, and my computer's running short. There are so many. I made notes on every card. There's so much more that we could do. So I think I'm going to take a moment to ask a question, since we only have about maybe 8 more minutes of class and I have 6% more on my computer. Would it be preferred if we jumped to another topic next week, because that'll be our last week in this session, and we can either finish with this topic and we can walk through the animal symbolism of the rest of the deck, which could easily take our full hour, and I'll make sure my computer has a charger. Or if you feel like you've got the hang of it, and at this point, what you really want to do is sit down with the cards and begin to really notice all the non-hominid animals as if they were relevant to the story, and just spend the time with them. We can use the time whichever way you prefer. If you would like to explore a different topic next week, we can do that. We've got a vote for the minor symbolism in the animal symbolism in the minor cards, which, I mean, that would be exciting for me. I just want to make sure that I'm taking into account everybody's preferences. I also, I am doing some research into how other artists have made these interpretations. So another vote for animal symbolism. Okay, well, that's practically a quorum, right? Because we have a small class tonight. So why don't we assume that we're going to continue with animals next week? And we will go through the minors. Again, please make note that all of the seekers are on horses. Those are our knights. And again, they represent, action, drive, nobility. That is so much action. And if we have time, we'll be sure to take some time and go through the rest of the people cards too, because again, for me, that was really important to sort of find a way to express through animal imagery the natures of each of these cards. It would almost be as if you could imagine taking the humans out of the card and look at everything else with the animal in context, would it still make sense? That would be the dream if my animal symbolism was really complete. So we'll plan to continue with animals next week. I appreciate your trust in me as I try to find a way to organize this material. I feel a little bit that I'm just preaching to you about my artistic process, but I am trying to make sure that you have the information about how Pamela Coleman Smith made her choices. Likewise, and probably for many of the same reasons, because animals are fun. And if you're a mythically minded person, it gives you so much to go on. If you are willing to accept homework for this week, then what I would like you to do is spend some time with your cards, making note of the animals, making note, are there lots of anything? Obviously in my deck, we're seeing a lot of birds. There's reasons for that: artistic, magical, and just as a function of the material. So go through your deck and see what you see a lot of. If it brings up any questions, if there's any animal representation that really speaks to you or is repugnant to you, I would be like to, every card has a crow. Nice. Well, there you go. Again, like the gummy bear tarot, gummy bears in every page. Who knew? So go through your deck, spend some time making note of, if there's anything that you can learn about how the artist treated that, did they make them different colors? Did they make them face different directions? Did they, where are they positionally relevant to the dominant theme? And we can have a little bit of time to check in about that during class too. And since next week will be the last in this series, and then I'm going to take a 2-week break, since I've been teaching at least 2 to 5 classes for the last 3 months. I would love to spend a little bit of extra time, if you're willing to assume that, we'll run over maybe 15 minutes or something next time, in order to really be able to get into this subject and not be rushed. As always, I'm Madame Onça, and I'm so grateful for your time and your trust. You can go check out my snazzy new website, theworldspirittarot.com, and tell me what I need to do in order to make it even better. I look forward to seeing you next week, and I will, it takes us a couple days these days to get these videos edited down and titled, but when they are, I will be glad to share them with you so that you have the opportunity to review the information at your leisure and not at the pace of a caffeinated Gemini. Thank you all so much. And as I am always happy to say, please stay safe. Please stay sane during this crazy time. Stay in touch, and blessed be.